Welcome to Drinks Coach. Very, very important one. It's Christmas. And when it's Christmas, it's Portmas, isn't it? Port's not just for Christmas. Just thought I'd tell you that. Like dogs. I have 20 minutes to explain to you port, which took me a lifetime to understand. So I've been trying to work out how to deep dive and shallow dive at the same time. See what I did there? Okay, so thank you very much to my good friends Fiona and Christian at Quinta do Noval and Gonzalez Byass. Christian Seeley is a good friend of mine, and he's also a very generous friend, and he offered me some bottles so that I could explain port. So just owning up to the fact that some of these were free. Okay. Then at the end, I've got 3 absolute bangers that you should look out for. Port. What's port? It's a sweet red wine. But is it though? Is it? You see, what happens is you get grapes, you squish them. Sometimes it's still done by feet. Squish, 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 squish. Everyone gets high on the fumes, and they put in booze after a day of squishing and after a day of fermenting. So the grapes, all the mush, all that amazing dark tannin and colour and ink, which basically hennas your feet for months afterwards, starts to ferment, but after 24 hours gets to 1% alcohol. So at this point, you've basically got a big vat full of grapes, which are very slightly off, right? Just started to ferment. Then, colourless brandy, made from grapes, is added up to 19.5% alcohol, so 8.5% addition. And so you end up with what is effectively, if you think about it, like those little jars you get in France when you go on holiday and there's like prunes in Armagnac. You've got fruit preserved in vodka, effectively. The magic then happens after that. It comes from the vineyards, these very special, oh so beautiful vineyards of Portugal in the Douro Valley. Words can't describe how beautiful that wine region is. And yes, it is the most beautiful wine region in the world. Yes, winelands in South Africa, yeah, Centro Targo, Lake Wanaka and New Zealand, all utterly beautiful. But Portugal, the Douro, it's amazing. Okay, so, how do I explain port? Got 15 minutes? Not even. Okay, number 1, port comes in 2 types, ruby and tawny. Why are they called ruby and tawny? Because ruby ports are ruby in colour, tawny ports are tawny in colour. Why? Because ruby ports are fermented, then put into a bottle, effectively, through concrete or otherwise. Tawny ports are put into barrels and left in there until they're bottles. So they get browner and browner, oxidise faster, add flavours of wood, get a bit drier, more tannic. Totally different drinks. Same vineyards, totally different drinks. How can you tell what's tawny and what's ruby? If it says vintage anywhere on the label, it's a ruby port. Because you never write the word vintage on a tawny port. Reason is that tawny is normally sold as a 10-year-old, a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, or a 40-year-old. Sometimes it's sold as a vintage tawny, but it doesn't say vintage, does it? It says Colheita, and Colheita means tawny from 1 year. Whew, that's a good start. I think that's a good start. We're getting somewhere. Okay, so what happens? In order to make a port, you have to squish the grapes, put them into a vat, stick some booze in. If it's a cheap port, it tends to be cheap booze and cheap spirit, which also tastes quite earthy and pretty nasty. You end up with a drink after about 3 years. I think legally port has to be 3 years old when it's sold as port. A 3-year-old tawny tastes like ruby. It hasn't been in barrel long enough to actually really age it properly. So don't drink really young tawny, not worth it. Especially because actually 10-year-old tawny and things nearly 10 years old are actually amazingly inexpensive. Right, why have I chosen Quinta do Noval? Quinta do Noval serves 2 purposes. Number 1, it is a single estate. Effectively, there's 2 estates. There's Silveira and Quinta do Noval. But effectively, it's 1 block. So they release ports in vintages where we don't, what we call university declare, where everyone in the Porto, in the Douro Valley, declares because it was magnificent all the way down the valley. But they are separated, and I'll explain that bit as well. So, we're starting off with this. We've already explained ruby port, cheap ruby port, cooking ruby port. Good examples, War's Warrior, quite delicious. Graham's 6 Grapes, quite delicious. Taylor's First Growth, quite delicious. Quinta do Noval Black, also delicious. They're all probably about 5 years old. But you can use them in the cooking and wait until they go on discount. Now, the next step up is called late bottled vintage. I said the V word, that means it must be a ruby port. Correct. Okay, so, single vineyard late bottled port. It also says unfiltered. If it says unfiltered, or it says traditional, aka Wars, traditional LBV is another utterly delicious port. Nearly used it in here, but as you can see, we ran out of space. What is that? Okay, so an LBV is basically a regular port that is obviously when it's young, too feisty and too powerful and too spirity really to enjoy of any pleasure. So they hold it usually in concrete or stainless steel tanks for 6 to 7 years with some light aeration to help soften the tannins a bit. And then they bottle it. So it's sold to you 6 or 7 years old. So LBV means late bottled, but it's also a ruby port. It's not a vintage port necessarily, but it is. But it will come from one vintage. This is 2013, for example, but this is unfiltered, which means the stuff that you normally buy that says LBV from whatever port house, once you buy it, it doesn't age. It's all been filtered out. There's nothing in there to, there's no midi-chlorians, there's no Jedi flavours in there that will change over time. You drink it as fast as you can, otherwise it goes stale. This one is the old way of doing it, which is you get ruby port and you put it into a barrel for 3 to 4, maybe even 5 years. And then you bottle it. So it's had a bit of tawny to kickstart the aging process. So when you buy it, you've got a ruby port that ages in the rack for 10, 20, possibly even 30 years. But it's already got enough age, you can drink it young and it tastes delicious. Because the tawny process accelerates the development and complexity of the drink. So rule of thumb, if it's a young drink, drink tawny. Far more bloody interesting. Even if it's a £150 vintage port from 2017, dull as batshit for about 40 years, drink tawny instead. Okay, unless you're a real nerd and you go, oh, I can see where this is going. So, this is Quinta Naval, unfiltered, 2013. Not university declared vintage. I can remember it was very hot, but it had quite a late ripening season as well because there was frost at the beginning. Lovely dark colour, as you expect port to be. That's clearly a ruby port, isn't it? That's not tawny. Nothing tawny about it. I cannot put port in my mouth without smiling. I love port. So, we've explained basic ruby port. What's the next step? Tawny. Let's go over to Tawny Port. This is, as I say, Quinta Naval 10-year-old Tawny Port. What is a 10-year-old Tawny? Why don't they just call it, this is 2020, why don't they just call it 2010 Port? Because that would be a Colheita. That would be a vintage Tawny, because it all comes from 1 year. The thing about this is, it only has to taste like a 10-year-old port. It doesn't actually have to be 10 years old. Sound like a con? Could be. But if you're quality conscious, it's not a con. Because what you've got in here is some port that's younger than 10-year-old, which is super juicy, fruity and fresh. It gives this whole perspective of the drink, real complexity. But also there's some ports in here that are way older than 10 years old. So the average age is 10 years. So let's say, for sake of argument, this is a real simplification, you get every vintage from 2005, 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That average age would be 10 years old, right? But most of the port isn't actually 10 years old. It's either 5 years younger or 5 years older or anywhere in between. But because you're blending all these vintages together, two things happen. Number one, you have amazing complexity. Amazing complexity. It's been aged in wood already. So it's already got lots of sexy flavours that you only really get from expensive whiskey, frankly. But also, if you're blending 10 vintages together on a rolling basis, there's going to be a good vintage, a bad vintage, a hot vintage, a cold vintage. The wine is utterly consistent going forward. You almost don't have to worry about the style of it because the style of the house manifests itself naturally, almost. So you end up with a wine which is very consistent, which is multiple blend of vintages. So you end up with you're not drinking a bottle of the best Ferrari in the world. You've bottled Jay Leno's fucking garage. It's like 200 of the best cars all mixed together. It's an orchestra. What are we looking at for price? This one, Ocado, I think. Let's have a look. Yes, Ocado, £21.50. You can't argue with that, can you? 21 quid for what is basically a vintage port. This one, unbelievably, normally £25 and a bargain, by the way, at £25. From Waitrose, it's a fiver off. 20 quid. Yeah, a score, right? Oh, so lovely. The smell is not just fruit anymore now. And look at the colour. That's what tawny is. It's brown, right? It's tawny like a tawny owl. Duh. There's more raisiny exposure. There's more oxidation. There's more rancio. There's kind of a hint of sherry about Tawny Port that you don't get in Ruby Port for a very long time. It's bright and fresh. I can taste this lively acidity. Had this been a Quinta Naval 20-year-old, which is a lot more expensive, it wouldn't be 5 years old, fresh fruit, and 15-year-old. It'd be a very different expression and style altogether because it's between 15 and 25 years old. So you end up a bit like cognac, having much more of an exo style. It's more about the oak almost than the fruit. Very important. Probably the most important expression of any porthouse is the style of their 10-year-old. It kind of sets the tone of how good they are. And if you think about the really great 10-year-old ports, 10-year-old Skeffington from Taylor's is very good. A Ramos Pinto 10-year-old, fucking delicious. And this, and we'll come on to one as well. But 10-year-old Quinta Naval Tawny, 20 quid. Why am I going on about this so much? Because it's the port, forget all the rest, that goes with Stilton. It's the right style. It's got the right balance of aggression, freshness, delicacy and complexity. An old vintage port will be decimated by a blue cheese. You need something soft like a Jarlsberg. Or if it was a young vintage port, it would kick 7 bells of crap out of the cheese. No good. Okay, 10-year-old Tawny, Stilton, game over. Okay, right, next one. By the way, this is a Dartington crystal glass, which one of the most proud moments of my drinking career, designed. This is the Wine Master range port glass. Of all the glasses I've ever designed, apart from the tasting glass, I think, the chef's taster, as it's called, the Dartington Crystal. It was a long time ago. I'm not getting royalties from them. I haven't for many, many years. But I think that you should buy this if you like port, if you like sherry, you like those sort of things, Madeira. This is the most useful glass you can have. It's beautifully made. It's beautiful hand-blown crystal made by a Swedish crystal blower. What can I say? It's fantastic for whiskey. It's fantastic for rum. It's fantastic for all of those eau de vies. But I've never tasted port tasting better in a different glass to that. So, 10-year-old Tawny, what are we on to next? Colheita. This is a single vintage Tawny from 2005, which was not a declared vintage as such. So you don't see vintage 2005 port around very much. Which means there was an awful lot of very good fruit and very good single Quintas, which they turned into Tawny Port. So this has been aged in barrels for 15 years up until now, from a single expression of a single vintage, unlike this one. Difference in price, that's 20 quid. This is more like 50 quid, if I'm honest. 50 quid is the normal price for it. However, I looked it up just now. Where are we? $42.99 at Waitrose or Ocado. One of those two. $42.99. 7 quid off its normal retail. 42 quid sounds quite spenny, doesn't it? This is 15-year-old vintage port, baby, but it's got the flavour of some expensive oak. Quinta Naval is owned by a company called AXA Melusine, which is a French insurance company that also owns some of the finest Bordeaux estates in the world. Chateau Sudereau Sauternes, Pichon Baron, second growth. Probably the greatest red wine in the Medoc in Bordeaux after the great Premier Grand Cru Classes. I'll go one further. I actually prefer it to a couple of them. Okay, so. It's hard to describe how delicious that smells. It's just so much going on. It's almost like looking at the sky, and each flavour is a different star. You keep looking, and they keep appearing. Utterly profound smell. It's like someone's polishing your throat. Oh, God, it's so intense as well. It's got energy in the drink. Freshness and acidity, but so silky and long. And the Decanter World Wine Awards, they gave that 92 points. I think they probably underscored it slightly. Absolutely amazing. Very hard to think of a single circumstance where you pay £40 for a bottle of wine and it's better than that. And remember, it's half the strength of whiskey, so you're getting a bang for your buck at the same time. Moving us on to Ruby Port. So this is what a bottle of vintage port looks like. It says vintage, which, what does that mean? What does that mean? Yes, right, it's a Ruby Port. This is only spent by law, declared acceptance law, 2 years in oak. So after 2 years in wood, it's bottled with all the crap and sediment and umscar in the bottle, and it's usually left to lie down for half a century. Especially Quinta Naval, because it aged so well. This is 2014, which was not declared by other people. It actually even rained in the vintage. So people are going, what the hell is he doing declaring it? It's super, super lovely and elegant. But remember, this is only 6 years old. This is the youngest wine here. And it's even when you're picking the finest fruit from one of the finest estates in the whole of Portugal. When it's this young, it's hard to say it gives you more pleasure than these. Unless, like me, you know where it's going. And actually, as a wine taster, I think this wine's rather fabulous. And it is rather fabulous because this has been open for 3 days already. So it's just starting to reveal of itself its real character. Silky, porcelain tannins, very soft, fine tannins. It's like huckleberry pie. It's like a blueberry cheesecake. Holy crap, I'm going to have a big headache on Christmas Day. Okay, that's Quinta Naval's story over. I think I've explained to you what port is, which is a red sweet wine, but not really. It's more like fruit preserved in alcohol, just to reiterate it. It says vintage on the bottle. It is a ruby. If it doesn't, it's probably a tawny. Tawny is better value. What have we got for deals here? Well, this is the deal of Christmas, ladies and gentlemen. Of all of the wine deals I'm going to show you, it's this bad boy here. If you go into any Waitrose right now, I don't know if you're in a part of the world where it doesn't have a Waitrose. I'm sorry if that's the case, but you can buy them online if you're in the UK. This is Kopke, one of the largest producers of port. It's part of the Soga Vintage Group, along with Feuerherd and Barros. The packaging is unmistakable, that painted stencil label. This is a Tawny Port. It doesn't tell you, but this is a 7-year-old Tawny, and these guys specialise in making Colheitas. And they are selling Colheitas going back to 1941, I think the last time I looked. But that's 450 quid a bottle. Okay. It's a tenner. Yes, a tenner. You can cook with it if you want. You can brush your teeth with it, but it tastes fucking nice. Okay, so. At the press tasting, well done, chaps. Well done, Jamie, at Waitrose. You've done an absolute blinder buying this. Normally $14.99. It's one of the Christmas deals where it's a tenner during Christmas. You'd be a fool not to buy more than one bottle. It's only a tenner. It's a price for some branded piece of crap from Australia. This is real Tawny Port. It's been looked after for 7 years in barrels, lovingly blended. It's taken me all of my willpower not to drink the rest of this because I opened it about 3 days ago. Unbelievable drink. Fantastic. Goes with every cheese you've got. Drink it in front of James Bond. Drink it in front of Snake Plissken or whatever games you're playing on your new computer games. Okay, moving on. Okay, not cheap. 35 quid. Another 10-year-old Tawny. Doesn't say vintage anywhere, does it? No, must be a Tawny. It has a little International Wine Challenge silver medal. And now I do judge that competition, and I may well have even given it a silver. I think that's underrating it slightly. Jancis Robinson, the doyenne of female wine writers, gave us 17.5 points, which is a very high score for her out of 20, especially for something so humble. This is Quinta de Silveira. Rodrigo Martins, one of the great winemakers in the Douro Valley, is in charge of making this wine at this estate that's been in the same hands for about 2 centuries. On the nose, going back to style, because you're setting out your stall, it's like the non-vintage champagne of a champagne house. Your 10-year-old Tawny tells the world what you're all about. Much paler in colour, not so much extract. But wow, you can taste the aged material in there. There's old stuff. Explains why this is only £20 and this is £35, because this stuff is probably leaning much more towards actually having a minimum age of 10 years. Delicious aftertaste of baked fruit, persimmon, fig, dates. I can feel a blue cheese craving coming on. Last one. If you're going to drink a vintage port this Christmas, this is the one to have. Smith Woodhouse, part of the larger group of port houses, which includes War, Graham's, Dow. Dow's a personal favourite of mine. My birth year, Dow 70. Ooh la la. Okay. But they also have, so War, Dow, Graham. They also have Delaforce. Is it Delaforce? They have Smith Woodhouse. And one or two others. Sorry if I've forgotten you. This isn't the Oscars. This is the same vintage as this. So that's a Colheita vintage port. But you can't say vintage because it's a Colheita. This is actual vintage port from the same year. 2005 turns out to be not as half bad as we thought and ages very well. It was also a very warm year, and I've discovered that in warm years, Smith Woodhouse is the daddy. It's a banger. This is from the Madalena vineyard. It's single Quinta. So like Quinta de Naval, it's declared one single vineyard's fruit because they thought it was worth it. And this is being sold by, the Wine Society. You're not a member yet? Then you can't have it. 35 quid. Same price as this. For a 15-year-old vintage port. Drank this at 67 Pall Mall at their press tasting back in when we didn't lock down in between. If you're not a member of Wine Society yet, and the membership costs the same as a bottle of this, you don't know what you're missing. Enough said. See you next time. God, it's incredible. This is really good. Buy some of this, Society members. next time.